The police lights came out of nowhere, flashing red and blue across the quiet street, freezing every movement in place. An elderly black man stood beside the car he had driven for years, his hands trembling slightly, not from guilt, but from something far deeper. The officer's voice was sharp, filled with suspicion, already convinced of a crime that hadn't been proven. Neighbors began to watch. Phones slowly came out, but then everything changed. Because the moment the officer learned who this man really was, the confidence in his eyes vanished. And what happened next left everyone in stunned silence. The question is, why did the officer suddenly freeze? For 72-year-old Samuel Carter, routine was everything. Every morning, he woke before the sun, made himself a simple breakfast, and stepped outside into the same neighborhood he had called home for over 4 decades. People knew him there. They waved when he passed. Some remembered him as the quiet man who always helped push stalled cars off the road. Others remembered him as someone who never missed a day of work, no matter how tired he was. His car sat parked in the driveway, nothing flashy, just an aging sedan with fading paint and a soft rattle in the engine. He had bought it years ago, paid for it honestly, and cared for it the best he could. It wasn't just transportation. It was independence, proof that he could still stand on his own. That evening, the air was calm, and the streets were quiet as Samuel stepped into the driver's seat and started the engine. He wasn't in a hurry. He never was. His hands rested calmly on the steering wheel as he pulled onto the road, unaware that someone nearby was already watching. To Samuel, it was just another drive, another normal moment in a long, honest life. But to someone else, it looked like something entirely different. And in just a few seconds, a man who had spent his entire life doing everything right was about to be treated like he had done something terribly wrong. Samuel had barely driven 2 blocks when the flashing lights appeared behind him. Red and blue reflections danced across his rearview mirror, cutting through the calm of the evening like a warning he didn't understand. His fingers tightened around the steering wheel. His heart began to pound, not from guilt, but from confusion. He hadn't sped. He hadn't turned suddenly. He hadn't done anything wrong. Slowly, carefully, he pulled over. The police cruiser stopped inches behind his bumper. Its engine hummed, loud and heavy, like it was waiting. Samuel sat still, both hands visible on the wheel, just as he had seen people do on television. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. Then the officer stepped out. Young, tall, confident. His hand rested near his belt as he approached, his expression already hardened. He wasn't curious. He wasn't calm. He looked certain. Samuel rolled the window down halfway. The officer's eyes immediately scanned him. His face, his hands, the inside of the car. And then his voice came, cold and direct. He demanded to know where Samuel got the car. Not asked. Demanded. The question hit Samuel like a shockwave. For a moment, he didn't even understand it. He blinked, his mind trying to catch up. He had owned this car for years. He had driven it through this neighborhood hundreds of times. No one had ever questioned him before. But now, suddenly, he was being looked at like he didn't belong in his own seat. Samuel answered calmly. He told the officer it was his car. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled slightly. He moved slowly, carefully, not wanting to make any sudden movements. The officer's expression didn't change. If anything, it grew more suspicious. He ordered Samuel to step out of the vehicle. Not requested. Ordered. Samuel hesitated for half a second, not out of defiance, but out of disbelief. His joints ached as he pushed the door open and stepped onto the pavement. The cool air hit his face, but it didn't calm him. Nothing could calm him now. A passing car slowed. Then another. People were watching. The officer circled him, his eyes sharp, analyzing every movement like he was waiting for Samuel to prove him right. Samuel stood there exposed, vulnerable. He explained again. He told him how long he'd owned the car, how he lived just down the street, how he had done nothing wrong. But the officer wasn't listening. To him, Samuel wasn't a neighbor. He was a suspect. The officer reached for his radio. His voice was calm, controlled, but the words carried weight. He called in the license plate, requested verification. His eyes never left Samuel, watching him like he might run, even though Samuel hadn't moved an inch. Seconds stretched into minutes, each one heavier than the last. Samuel could feel the eyes of strangers on him now. Some curious, some concerned, some silent. His chest tightened, not from fear of arrest, but from something deeper, something familiar, something he had felt before, long ago, in moments he thought the world had left behind. And then, suddenly, the radio responded. The officer listened. His posture shifted. His face changed. The certainty that had filled his eyes just moments ago began to disappear. The officer's radio crackled again, louder this time. Samuel watched as the young man pressed it closer to his ear, his jaw tightening. The confidence that had once filled his posture was gone now, replaced by something else. Something uncertain. The voice on the other end repeated the information. The vehicle wasn't stolen. It was legally registered. Registered for over 15 years. Registered to Samuel Carter. For a moment, the street went completely silent. Samuel stood there, his fragile frame illuminated by the flashing lights, his dignity already scattered across the pavement. Cars had slowed to watch. Strangers had witnessed him being treated like a criminal. And now, the truth sat heavily in the air between them. But the officer didn't speak. Not immediately. Instead, his eyes studied Samuel again, this time differently. Not with suspicion. Not with accusation. But with something closer to realization. Because the radio hadn't just confirmed ownership. It had confirmed who Samuel Carter was. A man who had spent decades serving his community. A man whose name carried respect in quiet places. A man who had done everything right. Samuel could see it now, the shift, the hesitation, the flicker of something breaking behind the officer's eyes. His authority, once so firm, now felt uncertain, fragile, but the damage had already been done. Samuel's hands were still trembling. His heart was still racing. His neighbors were still watching. He hadn't just been questioned. He had been reduced. Reduced to suspicion. Reduced to doubt. Reduced to something less than the life he had built. And in that moment, the officer stood frozen, not because of what Samuel had done, but because of who he realized Samuel had always been. The officer stepped back slowly, his voice quieter now, stripped of the authority it once carried. He returned Samuel's identification with unsteady hands. There was no accusation left. No commands. Just silence. Samuel took the card and held it for a moment before placing it back in his pocket. His movements were calm, but inside, something had shifted. The flashing lights were still there. The watching eyes were still there. But the man who had stepped out of that car minutes ago was not the same man standing there now. No apology could erase what had just happened. No explanation could undo the feeling of being seen as a threat in his own neighborhood. Samuel had done everything right his entire life. He had worked hard, followed the rules, built a life of dignity and honesty. And yet, in a single moment, none of that had protected him. The officer returned to his cruiser without another word. The lights turned off. The street slowly returned to normal. But for Samuel, normal would never feel the same again. Because this wasn't just about a car. It was about how quickly a lifetime of integrity could be overshadowed by a moment of assumption. It was about how easily someone could be reduced to suspicion simply because of who they were. Samuel eventually got back into his car and drove home, just as he had planned that evening. But the road felt heavier now. The silence felt louder. And somewhere deep inside, one question remained, a question bigger than him, bigger than that street, bigger than that moment. If a man like Samuel could be seen as a suspect without cause, how many others had faced the same truth, and how many more still would?